The United States enters its fourth year of urban revolt. 50 cities feel the hot blast of race warfare. 90 deaths, 2,000 injuries, 12,000 arrests.
Our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal.
For years, there have been charges that many public housing projects in American cities reinforce and perpetuate racial segregation, that they are publicly planned and financed ghettos.
The white politicians were able to concentrate African Americans, keep them in a neighborhood, and not have to deal with them in other parts of the city where they weren't wanted. What became very clear was that concentration of poverty isn't a solution.
The Supreme Court says that the federal government can be guilty of furthering segregation when it subsidizes ghetto housing.
The decision could eventually bring desegregation of white suburban neighborhoods and break up the big city black ghettos.
All of the other forms of segregation that exist in our society begin with where do you live, where do you stay, and the effects of that segregation may be harsher than ever.
In 1966, Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders took their fight for equality north to one of the most segregated cities in America, Chicago. On top of their agenda, improving housing conditions and ending housing discrimination.
Back to the jungle, you guys! Back to the jungle! Go, will you? No, go. They're all black panthers.
I have never seen, even in Mississippi and Alabama, a mob as hostile and as hate-filled as I've seen here in Chicago.
Many black residents were concentrated in the worst neighborhoods, with the poorest in vast government housing projects.
The world of the people who live here bears very little resemblance to the American dream.
Valencia Morris and her 3 daughters would eventually live in one of them.
There was garbage, junk on the outside of the buildings. Even in kindergarten, first grade, my daughters would get beat up on the way home from school. They were becoming not violent, but on the defense.
She said, listen, either you're gonna learn how to fight back or you're gonna keep getting beat up. I can't help you. My mom was starting to see how the environment was beginning to change us, and so she was desperately looking to leave.
A group of public housing residents who wanted to live in better neighborhoods with more resources turned to Alex Polikoff, a volunteer lawyer for the ACLU.
You had virtually no options. We'd had some 18,000 public housing apartments built, almost exclusively in black neighborhoods. There was pervasive housing discrimination in the private market. Realtors would not show you white neighborhoods. If you got to a white neighborhood, a landlord wouldn't rent to you.
Polikoff filed one of the country's first public housing segregation lawsuits, named Gautreaux.
The suit asked the court to order that public housing be built in white neighborhoods like this one.
I was pessimistic about the chances. Everybody knew why the projects were being built in the black neighborhoods, but very few people would say so. This was the way things were.
The mere suggestion that residents of these buildings be dispersed has been bitterly resisted by white neighborhoods.
Well, it's going to bring down the value of everybody's property.
Why do you think that?
Because, well, I don't know why. You see those other projects they have and they don't take care of them.
But the lawsuit came at a time when the problems and inequality in the inner cities were becoming national priorities. And then,
Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
100 cities rage with riot. 39 die. 20,000 are arrested.
7 days after King's assassination, the government banned racial discrimination in housing. And when the Supreme Court ruled in Polikoff's favor 8 years later, the government would have to start providing public housing in white Chicago neighborhoods, including the suburbs.
The effect of the case will be far-reaching, even beyond busing, perhaps even changing the structure of America as we know it.
We're talking about providing housing opportunities for people who have been subject to governmental discrimination in the past. And the only remaining question is, where should those opportunities be provided?
One part of the answer was an experiment in integration that had never been tried before, giving vouchers to a few thousand families from the Chicago projects and helping them rent apartments in the suburbs.
You had to use your voucher to move to a predominantly white middle-class community, and such communities have good schools, they have low crime, they're close to job opportunities. This was a hopeful moment because a new doorway had opened up in terms of how to deal with segregated neighborhoods.
The Morrises were one of the first families to move.
I immediately called and asked him to put my name on the list. I couldn't believe how beautiful it was, how quiet it was. When I saw the apartments, it was unbelievable because I had never seen a dishwasher before.
But life as one of the town's only black families wasn't always easy.
I would go out in the morning to get in my car, and there would be rotten eggs thrown on the windshield and all over the car. The girls would tell me that people would call them names. They would call them nigger, baboon.
My mom's advice was, you have to win, period. Keep your head up, keep your mouth shut, and win.
My mom would insist that we had the top grades. Whatever we did, she would talk to us as if we were going to succeed.
There was so much that we were able to do. Our high school had a full-size professional stage. We had a music program. We had all of the state-of-the-art sports equipment you could ever want.
By the time Kaya Morris was a teenager in the 1990s, the media was taking notice of how new neighborhoods could help families succeed, and the Morrises were profiled on national television.
Are you glad your mother did what your mother did?
Yes. Oh, yes.
On the American agenda tonight, the power of new surroundings.
The Gautreaux program was designed to promote racial integration, but it is also breaking the welfare cycle.
The social science research was startling. Mothers got jobs. Children who went to school went on to college.
The residents deserve decent housing.
Henry Cisneros, the new Secretary of Housing at Urban Development, hoped programs like Gautreaux could replace government-owned housing across the country, especially the high-rise projects.
It was as segregated as you could define the word segregation in America. Dilapidated buildings, unlivable places. Some of them were national stories.
Gang snipers and drug dealers, broken elevators, leaky ceilings, and squalid living conditions.
And we made people live there. The juxtaposition of that reality in a solution like Gautreaux made it very clear to me we needed to work at this, precisely at this point.
Cisneros promoted a pilot program in 5 cities. Unlike Gautreaux, it was primarily designed to target poverty, not segregation, but it shared the same concept, moving public housing families to wealthier neighborhoods.
We're going to provide you help finding an apartment, getting your children placed in school.
Soon, moving families from the projects to the suburbs created another public backlash.
Twice this week, parts of East Baltimore County have gathered to try to stop MTO, Move to Opportunity.
Let's put a stop to it, folks.
The people who would be sent out would be those who needed serious counseling, would need to be taught to take baths and not to steal.
And 10 years later, when Lawrence Katz studied the 5,000 families in Moving to Opportunity who did move, the results were disappointing.
We're seeing very little in terms of the economic outcomes for the parents and very little in terms of things like test scores for the kids.
The early success of Chicago's Gautreaux program looked like a fluke, and both Gautreaux and Moving to Opportunity came to an end. No new families would be moved.
The conventional wisdom became mobility doesn't work. Government was not willing to consider it as a policy.
By then, the Morris family had already left the suburbs and moved to a middle-class neighborhood in Chicago.
I needed to just be around a diverse community. I wasn't necessarily accepted by all of the white friends that I had, and I was too white in some levels for the black kids that had moved into the community since then.
She grew up in the suburbs, so as far as knowing African Americans, she didn't really know how we are. So I said, I need to get back into Chicago before she loses her identity.
Today, many of the high-rises have come down, and vouchers have become the largest part of the country's public housing program. But the vouchers often don't come with enough money or assistance to help families live in better neighborhoods. And in many cities, racial and economic segregation remain a problem.
Hence, we have in America today places like Ferguson and other places all across the country which basically became the new concentrations.
In some places, poverty got even more concentrated.
These are the economic signs of the times. Row upon row upon row of boarded-up houses.
For those at the bottom of the ladder, the degree of segregation is the same, and one might even say the effects are harsher.
Nothing like this in Baltimore since the famous riots in Baltimore in 1968, following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
More clashes tonight in Milwaukee between demonstrators and police.
The Milwaukee Health Department has found Milwaukee to be the most segregated major city between black and white residents.
I think we have history repeating itself, and the reason is things haven't changed significantly.
People don't feel that they have full access to what most Americans and what people here would call the American dream.
In 2014, Lawrence Katz saw new research on the importance of neighborhoods, including a study about the children who left New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Nearly 10 years after the hurricane, the kids who moved to better neighborhoods were more likely to succeed. Katz decided to find out what happened to the children who moved as part of Moving to Opportunity. And now that the youngest children had grown up, he discovered something policymakers hadn't predicted.
We're seeing them earning 30% more than a kid who didn't get the opportunity to move to a better neighborhood. We're seeing college-going rates increase dramatically. We couldn't see that when the kids weren't old enough.
It turned out that the program wasn't a failure at all.
Neighborhoods and childhood development are long investments, and one has to have some patience. Most things that are investments take a while to pay off.
I am publisher and editor of the Brooklyn Reader. My middle sister, Jamila, is a professor in Central Illinois. And my youngest sister, Kaya, is a state assemblywoman in Bennington, Vermont.
I'm proud and honored to be the first person of color ever to come out of Bennington County. I'm the first black woman to be elected into the House in 25 years. If we were not given this opportunity, would I be here today? And there are specific requirements. There's someone that deserves that chance to have the energy to do the hard work that it takes to get ahead. And you can't do that when you're under the weight and the oppression of poverty. You just cannot.
There are a lot of things that I can feel proud about. And I know in the back of my mind that it has nothing to do with me necessarily. It had to do with my circumstances. When my mother gave me the license to start fighting, that was gonna probably be my life. I would have been someone completely different. It would have been a big waste of a person.
Nobody picks where they're born or chooses where they're raised as a child. You play the cards that you're dealt. I just think it's unfortunate that the cards in our hands are, after 30 years, still unequal.
We're losing people who could be innovators. We're losing people who could be artists. And we could have a much more vibrant society if we had less concentration of poverty and social problems.
In the wake of Katz's study and other research on the importance of neighborhoods, the government is proposing changes to the housing voucher program to try to make it easier to move to better neighborhoods.
A zip code should never prevent any person from reaching their aspirations.
I think that there's an optimistic moment in time. People are taking note of the problem, but whether the country will do something about it is the $64 question.
Alex Polikoff is still working on housing segregation cases, 50 years after he first filed the Gautreaux case.
I didn't want to let go till the job was ended, and I don't know when that's going to be.